All right, good evening and welcome to June's BOULDEXO presentation. I'm Paul Sperry, and it is my pleasure to moderate tonight's presentation featuring two internationally acknowledged researchers and authors speaking about their latest book, Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. To render this event even more unique, joining them is José Padilla, the actual witness to this UFO crash over 75 years ago. Our speakers are connecting from San Francisco, Socorro, New Mexico, and Longmont, Colorado. To put this presentation into perspective, mankind's first nuclear explosion, Trinity, occurred on July 16, 1945. Just 20 days later, on August the 5th, the first atomic bomb in history on Hiroshima signaled the end of World War II. 1 month after the Trinity event, a UFO crash was witnessed by José Padilla just 20 miles from the Trinity site. It was almost 2 years later when the more famous Roswell UFO crash occurred 120 miles east of Trinity. As in recent presentations, our guests will speak for around 15 minutes, stop briefly for questions and comments, then continue. Intermediate breaks will last just a few minutes and will save longer discussions for the end. To ask a question, click the raise hand button at any time, and I'll call on you during the break. Depending upon your Zoom version and computer, that button is found under either the reactions, chat, or participants buttons. If you need any technical assistance, send a message directly to Marianne Sperry. This video is being recorded, so if you choose to remain anonymous, you can change your name and turn off your video. It seems appropriate that we are addressing this evidence on the eve of the highly anticipated June 25th disclosure of what the U.S. knows about UFOs. After 75 years of continual denial, will officials be able to shift their story? Why are we still asking questions about this? Judging from yesterday's New York Times headline, we might want to lower our expectations. That headline being, U.S. finds no evidence of alien technology and flying objects, but can't rule it out either. Jacques Vallée is the author of at least a dozen books on UFOs and the paranormal, plus more traditional titles on science and technology. With an MS in astrophysics and a PhD in artificial intelligence, Jacques is particularly well positioned to write on this topic. Personal friends with the most highly respected UFO researchers, names like Hynek, Haldier, Corso, and Vogel come to mind, and respected research organizations, including Stanford Research Institute, the University of Texas, DARPA, and others. He brings much erudition to this topic. Jacques was the real-life model for the head researcher in the film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Jacques is a true scientist who investigates objectively, is willing to ask questions others won't consider, and follows the data wherever it leads. Paola, too, is a prolific author on UFO studies, having published books in English, Italian, Spanish, and French. With degrees in English, French, and science, plus a master's in education, he is ideally matched to complete this scholarly work with Jacques. One of Paula's signature accomplishments has been in locating, interviewing, and documenting the accounts of the world's most credible sources on unidentified aerial phenomena. She has established personal relationships with many of the greats, including Ellen Hynek, Colonel Philip Corso, Sergeant Clifford Stone, astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and many more. Paola has tirelessly worked for decades to add credibility to the UFO phenomenon and bring it to the masses. She further sponsors seminars around the world, including Starworks USA in Laughlin, Nevada. Just 9 years old at the time of his sighting, José Padilla knew nothing of UFOs, had no preconceptions about what he was seeing, and thus was the perfect witness. He was accompanied by 7-year-old Remy Baca, and together these children returned many times to witness the Air Force cleanup of the crash site. Now 84, Jose previously served in the Korean War at age 17, worked for the state of California, and is now retired in Socorro, New Mexico. He has been in TV documentaries, but this is his first interactive presentation with his audience. Jose has had poor hearing since his eardrum was burst by the Trinity blast. So ask your questions slowly and distinctly. Jacques and Paola are in great demand, so we are quite fortunate to have them with us tonight. Jacques was on a call of 600 just this morning. So it is with great pleasure and respect that we welcome Jacques, Paola, and Jose to BOULDEXO.
Hello, everybody. This is an experiment. I've got to say that in advance. Thank you, Paul. You did a great job introducing us. When I suggested this, everybody was holding their breath because we've never done a three-way like this. So I suggested, instead of my doing a presentation for BOULDEXO by myself, that I could do it with my co-author and my partner in crime, Jacques Vallée, and with the actual witness, José Padilla. Jose is not computer savvy. He doesn't have a computer, but he is able to enjoy the fact that he is the protagonist in this book and that you people all appreciate his courage. This is a once in a lifetime situation that Jose has granted us to be part of this transmission. So I would like to just start out by saying that 9 years ago, I began working on this story, and that from that point of view, I learned about these two little boys, little Hispanic boys that were present on August 16th to view a UFO come in and crash about 20 miles from where the atomic bomb was blasted. And so I started working on it, getting their testimony. We've lost one. We've lost Remy Baca, the 7-year-old. We have the 9-year-old here. And as I'm working on this, 4 years ago, Jacques Vallée came in on the story because he parallelly had been working on it too, and had lost, we had lost Ron Brinkley, who was the researcher that Jacques was working with. So Jacques learned about me and we joined forces, and that's what brought out Trinity, which I think is one of the key books that will ever be written on a real case. Both the methodology and the history of this book, the way that we did this story, plus the history of this area are what's so important. And I'd like to pass it to Jacques, and then we'll have Jose tell the story of what happened. But Jacques, would you come in and talk about your involvement with this case?
Well, as you mentioned, Paola, I came in after you had already identified the two witnesses and recorded interviews with them. So I was able to work initially from the transcripts that had been done very professionally. And you introduced me to Mr. Padilla. What makes the case unique and what led me to become involved, and as you know, must have gone back to New Mexico 5 times just in the last 2 years, is the fact that we have the testimony of the witnesses who were there even before the object arrived, which is exceptional. And the Roswell case is an interesting case, but the wreckage was discovered several days after the actual crash, and people had to locate the site where it happened. Here we have the privilege of knowing everything about the environment as it was before, and before the object arrived and when it arrived. Furthermore, the two witnesses, Remy and Mr. Padilla, knew the environment intimately. And again, it's one of the main hurdles in the book was to translating for today's audience what the world was like in 1945. People, you know, a 9-year-old driving the family truck. Well, of course, all the adults were in uniform, and they had not been demobilized yet. The kids had to be responsible. They had to take care of the cattle. They had to take care of the property for the family. And so it's a big challenge, I think, in the book was in getting today's reader to identify with the exceptional location and the exceptional times at the very end of the war. The sighting happened within 2 days of the capitulation of Japan. Most American able men were in uniform and were scattered all over the world. This object comes out of nowhere.
He's asking if there's a collaboration possible and for it to become something that would work. And if not,
I'm getting some interference here. I don't know if you can hear it. So this object came out of nowhere, flew over the property that Mr. Padilla was watching over, mainly watching over the cattle and the fences and the physical conditions of the property, which was 80,000 acres. Okay, and the subject flies over, hits a communication tower. That tower was one of a network of towers around the White Sands area. It was still technically a military area. And that tower was there mainly to help in the pilots who came in and out of Alamogordo and in and out of White Sands, because there were cliffs to the north of this site. There are cliffs that airplanes had been hitting or that were very dangerous to air traffic. So the tower was there for communication. The object comes out of nowhere, hits the tower, bends one of the legs of the tower, and then crashes, although it's a controlled crash. You know, an airplane would have blown up at that point. This object does not blow up. It's not a disk. It's not a flying saucer. By the way, the term flying saucer is still 2 years in the future. It's going to be invented by Kenneth Arnold, 2 years later in 1947. There is no word for this. This object is an oval. They will describe it as an avocado, which turns out to be a very apt description of it. And it crashes. It digs a gouge in the earth, like making a road, building its own, excavating its own road. So it must have been still under power at this point. It doesn't just crash and rest. It plows through the landscape. That road will be used later by the military when they come to recover pieces of that craft. And then it makes a turn and it stops against the side of a hill. Again, what do you do in a case like this when you're a witness in a time of war? Well, the first thing that your duty is to provide help to whoever might be wounded. And that's what the kids are going to do. Except that there is smoke, there is fire. The object never catches fire, contrary to what has been written in one of the books that peripherally talks about the case. The plants are burning, the cactus, the creosote, the small bushes there are burning, and there is smoke, and it's very hard to know what's going on. The kids leave their horses behind and walk over to about 200 feet from the object, and then they see that this is no airplane. This is, again, a rounded, large avocado-shaped craft. And one panel has been blown out by the collision with the tower. And through that opening, they can see three human-like short men that they describe alternately as little men or as a sort of large insect. And but these creatures are breathing air. They don't have a spacesuit or anything like this. They are breathing air, and they seem to be in pain. And that's one of the very, one of the first really dramatic moments in this history, which is, is really an incredible human story. And
Maybe we can
I think
let
that's what.
Jose tell his impression of that.
Yes, absolutely.
You did an amazing job with the framework of this book. So, but I'm hoping people will read it, giving the background. But let's ask Jose what he felt like when he walked down with Remy and with the binoculars. Go ahead, Jose, talk about it. Jose, talk about how you felt when you walked down and what you saw.
When we walked down, we saw three little men sashaying back and forth through that slight crack on that object. And I told Remy that these creatures were hurt, and I wanted to go in there to help them. And he refused to do that.
But you had binoculars, and was there fire? What was there?
No, I told him that I was gonna go in there and help him anyway. And he started crying and wanted to go home, So we wound up getting on the horses and went back to the ranch.
How close were you to the?
It was probably about 150 feet.
So you could see the beings very closely.
Yes, they were hurt. They were running back and forth,
Okay.
squealing like a rabbit when they're injured, or like a small born baby.
What did they look like?
They were like to me, it seemed like they were like a fire ant standing upright. They had long arms, long fingers, 4 fingers.
What was the head like?
It looked like they had either a uniform or a real tight outfit.
And the head, was it normal?
The head was round. Their ears, their eyes were like a teardrop. The nose was like a couple of holes on it. The mouth was just a round object.
And did you see them through your binoculars?
I seen that through the binoculars, through that crack on that hole that was punched out.
And then you and Remy went back to tell your father?
We went back, told my father that we have found the cow and the calf, and we have found something else. Then my father told us to tie the horses down, and we went over and took Remy home. And he told us that we will return back the following day.
Did he talk to anybody? Your father?
My father talked to that state police.
Was it Sheriff Apodaca? You said?
Apodaca was his name. And the following day, we all got together. They got on the patrol car, my father and the state police, and we followed them until we got to the crest side. And when we got there, everything was swept up, like someone had got a rake and rake everything up above there. And we couldn't see the craft. That's when my father and Apodaca thought that we were lying. All of a sudden, the sun started shining up. That's where the craft, the straight of the craft started coming up into the earth. That's when Apodaca and my dad went inside that craft and looked around and came out and told us not to go there back again. That there was a government property and they were going to take care of it.
So did you and Remy obey your father?
We went back, but we sneaked in a couple of times to when the soldiers came over and started gathering things, rubbish, parts of that craft, you know. And
Why didn't they see you?
we were hiding behind a mountain there where there were cactuses grown up like a tree. At that time, you know, the cactuses and were used to grow up real tall like a tree. We used to hide behind that shade of it.
So how many days did it take to do this?
It was almost 6 days when they started cleaning up, and that the soldiers started kicking parts of the crab into a gully there where the water used to run down. They didn't cover it. They were supposed to pick up the parts and take them over to that an inventory shed that they had, but they were not doing their job.
You also said that a flatbed truck came in.
That's when military brought a flatbed truck that they built an L frame to load that object on it.
The object that the military told you your father was a weather balloon. Did the military tell your dad that it was a weather balloon?
The military main guy there told my dad that it was a weather balloon that belonged to the government and they had to get it out of there.
And this is the part of the research that's really interesting. I'm going to stop Jose for a minute. He did a really good job. You did a good job, Jose, because this is where Jacques came in. I had just done the transcripts. I had just done their word for word interviews. And Remy had the same story. They didn't live in the same place. Remy lived in Gig Harbor, Washington, so I had to go there. He lived in California. And when Jacques got involved in this, I thought the transcripts were just what we needed, but Jacques said, no, we need to know how many wheels were on the truck. We need to know how everything weighed. And Jacques, would you go into the details of the scientific part of the book where I kept questioning you why we needed to know how many wheels were on the truck and all this, because you were trying to figure out the weight of the object? Well,
I knew that our colleagues in science and physicists and so on would have. I knew the questions they would have. It's a nice story. It's one more story. We've heard stories like that about Roswell, Not quite like that, because here we have witnesses on the site itself watching the recovery, and then day after day watching how the military is proceeding to retrieve this object and take it away. The what we physicists will want to know is, well, whether, maybe it wasn't a weather balloon. I mean, obviously it wasn't a weather balloon, but maybe it was some sort of prototype and so on. So I need to know more about the parameters. I mean, how did it actually happen? And the kids had tried to move the object when they had access to it, when the soldiers went periodically. The soldiers left the site and went into town to get some food and so on. The site was very isolated, so nobody was worried about, people coming onto the property. But and most of the time they did not know that the kids were there. But so there were occasions where they could have access to the craft itself. And when Mr. Padilla told me that he tried to move it, and obviously the thing was much too heavy. Well, the question is, how heavy? And one way to know that is, what kind of truck would the Army bring in? Now, there is a very interesting discussion between the Army officer who came to see Faustino Padilla, José's father, to get permission to get on the property. And he said, well, we need your permission to cut your fence and to make an opening. And as I remember, José, your father said, well, there is already a gate, for the cattle. And the Army said, well, the gate isn't big enough for the truck that we're going to bring, which tells you right away that this was not some weather balloon that you could deflate and you could put in the back of a Jeep. A Jeep could go through the cattle guard, but the truck wouldn't. The truck they brought was an 18-wheeler with a lowboy, in other words, a platform where they would load this craft. Obviously, they had never seen a craft like this. I mean, this was not standard, this was not a prototype of anything. This was really unknown to everybody. So this was a surprise to the Army, as much as it was a surprise to, the people at the site, including Mr. Padilla. So they cut the fence. And we've been there, Paola. José has shown us the gate.
Many times.
They built a road. They had to bring a grader to build the road to the actual site so that this 18-wheeler could do that. That took a couple of days, and this was not something they could do in one afternoon. So the children could watch the recovery step by step by step, and they were outstanding observers. Remember, they had these binoculars. Well, why would they have high-grade binoculars? Well, they needed to be able to read the brand at a distance on the cattle, to count the cows. I mean, that was one of the things they were assigned to do for their father, taking care of the property, taking care of the fences, repairing the fences when a post had fallen. I mean, they were actively doing work on this property every day. Okay, and they knew the property intimately, and they were smart. They were very smart. But in those days, you had to be smart because you're left by yourself, trying to manage all these chores for the family. The truck comes in.
Jacques, can we
Yes.
go ahead and take a quick break to see if we have any questions and allow our audience to maybe interact with you just a bit and see if we have any?
Perfect.
Yeah, we're good. They're going to ask questions now.
Okay, so
Good
I
ask
saw a question earlier on. Are there any questions right now that are wanting to be asked? Okay, I see Cynthia has got one. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Thank you. Nice to see you all. And oops. Who's going?
Sid, go ahead, Sid, and then I'll get
Go
Cynthia right
ahead,
after that.
Sid.
Yeah, so hello, everybody, and
You
a
remember
special
Sid?
hello to Jose.
He remembers you, Jose.
Good.
I do.
So Jose shared that he recovered a piece of metal, and I was wondering if that was analyzed at all and what was learned from that.
Well, we haven't really gotten to that part of the story yet.
Oh,
You're jumping ahead, but
You're
okay.
jumping ahead.
we'll be glad to do that.
But do you want to answer that, Jose, now? Because Sid helped with cutting of some of that. And
Paula, let's wait until we get into that part of the story.
all right.
Let's go ahead and hold
All
that.
right.
I'll come back to Sid and let Cynthia go ahead and speak right now.
Okay.
Okay, this is for Jose. Hi, Jose. Thank you so much for telling us your story. This is really remarkable, and I
So
really
thank you for
appreciate it.
telling us your story. Okay.
Yes. Can you describe in more detail the beings that you saw?
And how big was the
Well,
crater?
he in what way? He told you what the head looked like, what the eyes looked like, how tall they were, that they had 2 holes for a nose, and that they had a gray outfit. Do you want him to describe how the communication went?
The book describes what looked like a praying mantis head.
Okay.
Well, only because the eyes were teardrop, not because it was a praying mantis. It was because they thought the eyes looked insecty, and because the arms were very, very long, as he described, that they were past the knees, the beings. Did you think they were children or men? What did you think they were?
Children,
Why did you think they were children?
because they were short like us.
Because they were short like them. They were short like them, so they thought they were children.
So Paola,
like
I have a question about that came up in the discussion this morning with
Okay.
the University of Albany, New York Albany. So the children are there. They are transfixed, looking at these entities, these creatures. There was some sort of communication between them, not spoken communication, but it seems that in that situation that Mr. Padilla had described to us several times, that there was some awareness of the children towards the creatures and vice versa. I would love to hear Jose describe what it was like, if he can go back to that time. So he's standing there. Remy is crying, okay? They've looked at these creatures with the binoculars. The creatures are aware of them. They are aware of the creatures. Jose would like to go help because he knows when people are wounded in war. Remember, there is a war going on still somewhere around all this. The atom bomb was just 3 weeks before, or a month before. What went through his mind during that time?
What was the feeling that you had when you were looking at those creatures? Was there communication? Did you think they saw you?
No.
You don't think the creatures saw you?
No, I don't think they saw us, no. Because we were too far away.
Okay, but was there any communication? Because Remy said that they flashed vision of people falling out of skyscrapers in his mind. What was going on when you were looking at them?
It was just that
How did you feel?
I feel that those creatures were hurt and they needed help. And the only help that I could have done it, but Remy didn't cooperate. That is why.
When you were looking at them, did you think that they knew you were looking at them?
No.
What
If they were looking at us, I think they could have done, if they were here to hurt us, they could have hurt us then.
But they didn't.
They didn't. They were hurting themselves, trying to get help to get the well.
So when you were, if you go back to the time that you were looking at them, you didn't feel like they knew you were there?
They didn't show any intentions of trying to get in touch with us.
In other words, they didn't leave where they were.
No.
No. So they
Uh-huh.
just were doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
Now, you told me, Jose, that you thought that that they were hurt, that you felt sorry for them. You had a feeling that of being sorry for them. Can you go into that? What made you?
What made you feel sorry for them? Why did you feel sorry for them?
Because I felt they were hurt. They needed help. They were injured.
Did
Okay.
did you have any feelings or images in your head at that point as you looked at them?
Did you have any images or feelings in your head? Did you have any dreams later on about them?
Afterwards, I used to see, I have dreams that like clouds were falling. And when I used to wake up, I would be perspiring. And then they used to go away a few times. It was just a bad dream, I guess.
And it was the same dream every time?
Yes.
And were you ever afraid of them?
No, I never been afraid of nothing, you know. I just wanted to help those creatures get well. And that was it.
So you weren't shocked or afraid or
No, I never thought about that, you know.
did you know what you were looking at? You never saw a craft like that.
No, I never seen anything like that before, you know. But that's the only impression I had is that they look like a to me, you know, they look like a fire ant upright.
Okay, an upright fire ant, but I think he means also because the arms are so long, they came down, the arms were very long and spindly, right?
Yes, that's the only difference there was from us.
That was the
Jose?
only difference.
Ron is asking about the dreams. Did the dreams start right after your event? And how long did the dreams last? Into days, months, years?
When did you start having those dreams? After the crash?
After the crash,
And how long did they last?
oh, it was
How many,
a month probably.
a month?
Okay, we've got two questions yet here, but just so we don't break up the momentum of the talk, we're going to go ahead and start again, and then we'll come back to Kai and Cynthia when we start up again, and also Sid. So I think we left off with Jacques. You were
Yeah,
talking
Jacques.
when we interrupted.
Yeah, but Jacques, when you were talking, you didn't really go into the how many tons that thing was and how you figured that out.
Yeah, we still, so when, the army brings this truck, and then they have to erect a crane. As I mentioned, the kids had tried to move the object and there was no way they could budge it. The army had the same problem. So they actually build a frame, and they bring a crane to be able to lift the object, put it on its side, and then and put it on the lowboy of the truck. The reason they need to put it on its side is that if they leave it upright, it's not going to go under the overpass on the highway on the way back to White Sands. So that gives you an idea of the size of it and of the weight of it. The weight would have been, we can only guess here, but about 4 to 7 tons It would be my best guess at this point. On the last day, when the object is on the lowboy, nothing more can happen to it. The army has put a tarp around it to hide it. And then the soldiers are, off to the cafe to have some refreshments before taking the thing away completely. And of course, Remy and Jose want to take a last look at the craft. The craft is there. It's not guarded anymore. They open up the tarp, and Jose goes inside. And that's a place where there is another chapter at this point, because there is still, the sun is setting, but there, and Jose, check me if I'm not recalling it exactly as you told me, but there was still some sunshine, so you could see inside this object. And inside the object, there is no machinery. The floor is flat. You estimated the size of the object, as something like about 15 feet high, about 12 feet above the floor. And I remember when I asked you, how did you know? I mean, you were a 9-year-old. How did you know it was 12 to 13 feet high above the floor? And Mr. Padilla's answer was, because that's the height of a beam when you build a house. And, these kids were very smart. These kids knew the world. They knew how you did things. They were, they were part of, of running things, practical things. And they knew the size of a beam. They knew what a 2x4 was like. They knew how you built machinery, how you operated machinery, and so on. So that leaves about 3 feet under the floor. The question for me is, again, my colleagues are going to say, well, what was under the floor? Because now that's the only place where you can have an engine. So how did this thing work? Well, when it was sideways on the truck, our two witnesses have a chance to look at the underside. And the underside, and maybe, Paola, we should ask Mr. Padilla again to describe it. My recollection of what he said was that there were some bumps or some structure on the underside, but the underside was not damaged, even though it had been, plowing this part of the landscape on the way down, that it had kept its integrity, it had not broken up. There was no opening. There were no propellers. There were no jet, there was no opening in it. So the machinery would have been 2 to 3 feet under the floor. If there was an engine, it would have been there, and it had no exhaust. So what kind of propulsion is that? Okay, and that's the place where my colleagues are going to be really interesting in putting it in the, in the framework of other cases that we know about. And we do in the book, of course, and as you know, in the book, we draw a parallel with Socorro and a parallel with the case in Valençol in France, 2 other cases that are in the government files. These are not just UFO, woo-woo descriptions by somebody. These were, the case in Valençol was investigated by 5 different agencies of the French government, and we have the records. So the question is, how do these things work? And this testimony is unique because this was, again, 2 years before Roswell, 2 years before anybody had heard of the term flying saucer. And here we have a very detailed description of the craft. On the last day, they paced the craft to get the dimensions, and they ended up with dimensions of about 20 to 25 feet long and about 15 feet high, which is roughly the size of a fairly large truck, and a weight of 5 to 7 tons.
Okay, so it's in the book, all this that Jacques is describing. This is what Jacques has contributed. That's why it was such a great honor to have somebody to collaborate with, because I just did the witness testimony and he did the scientific part, plus the historical part, which is not to be forgotten. I'm going to ask Jose now, when you went to see the craft underneath, what did it look like underneath when it was on the flatbed truck?
Come again?
When you went on the truck and you saw the craft underneath part, did you see the underneath part?
Yes, I did.
And what was it like?
It was a flat,
And did it look damaged?
it was crashed.
It was underneath part.
The underneath part was scratched where it slid on the
And
ground.
you saw the scratches. It was scratched, you said.
Yes,
It
correct,
scratched
yes.
where it slid on the ground because it made an L shape, right?
Yes,
And you saw that. And then you and Remy decided you wanted a souvenir.
true.
So talk about what you did. You wanted a souvenir.
Paola, can we stay with this for a moment, because I'm not. I realize when I describe the scene, I'm not very good at describing what the Mr. Padilla had described some structures. I mean, it wasn't just flat underneath. There were some bumps, or there were some.
Yeah, he said scratched. He said it was
No,
scratched.
scratched, but
He
was
said
there?
it was very scratched.
But was there any bump in it? Was
Was
there
there a
any?
bump or was it flat
Was there any
underneath?
structure underneath?
No, there was scratches where he could skid on the ground.
Okay, so it was just smooth, except for the scratches, but there was no bump, there was no structure
no
there,
bumps at all.
there was no machinery underneath.
There was no machinery underneath.
No,
So what was it like when
it
you
was
went
just
in?
like an oval shape flat where he had just skidded on the ground, and of course the scratches and nicks, were just scratched the bottom part of it.
And no opening, no exhaust.
No, the only thing that was there on that rear top end was a dome
On the top of it.
on top. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was for.
And it was transparent, right?
It was
it was-
transparent, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you and Remy decided you wanted a souvenir. So what did you do?
Well, at the last time when the soldiers went and lift up that object, loaded it on that low bed, they went over and parked it by the gate, and they all took off. There was 7 soldiers altogether. They all took off and went on the jeep to the yellow bar, and they left the tractor trailer parked by the gate. That is when Remy and I got on the horses and took off, went over to where the trailer was, and I told them that now's the time to get whatever we want to get out of it. And when that object landed, it landed on a kittywampus, and that hole happened to be towards the west side where the sun used to heat. I went over there and I told Remy to open up the tarp. He lifted up the tarp, and I looked inside there and it was clear. And the only thing that I can see there was a small 3 feet by 4 feet panel with like 4 bolts on each corner. And I went over there and tried to looked at it, and there was this object that used to turn in circles. I went over and tried to pull it out, and I couldn't. And I asked him, why don't you go over there and get that breaker bar, a sheeter bar.
A crowbar. It's a
Yes,
crowbar.
A crowbar. And he jumped up the truck, and went out to the bed and got the crowbar and brought it back. I stuck it in between the two objects there, and I pry on it, and they snapped. They were snap pins in there that didn't have no threads, didn't have no anchors to tie it on. And when they pull on it, the pins fell to the floor of that bed of the truck. And I forgot about it. I left them there. We got the pieces of object and loaded up on the saddlebag on the horses, and we hurried home to the ranch.
And then where did you put it?
We hid that underneath the barracks where that cowboys used to come over on bed at night. And we left it there.
They left it there until the army came to ask
Yeah.
if they had taken anything because they were missing something in the inventory. And that's when they took it out of the barracks and put it in the sheep herder shack.
And now we have it, thanks to you, Jose, and we're very puzzled by that object. It looks like the kind of object that people use in industry to transfer motion or power from one place to another. In fact, Paola had actually bought a thing that was somewhat similar, which is this thing. So this is a much smaller, much smaller device, and these devices are designed to turn around, just like Jose described, and you could attach different things. So it's like an actuators. However, there are a number of differences between this industrial thing that you can buy, at any specialized place, and what Mr. Padilla recovered. What he recovered, number one, was larger than this. It was more complex. It was made of aluminum. Actually, it was analyzed, not by us, but by other people, to be a standard alloy of aluminum called silumin, S-I-L-U-M-I-N. And this is, so it's a standard alloy of aluminum, which is used to make machine parts. However, this was not something that should have been there at the time. So the question is, was it brought in by the army, or was it really part of the machinery of the object? So that's what we're struggling with now. My first hypothesis, which Paola doesn't agree with, was that maybe the army had brought it as to provide some power. Now, this thing would have been rotating around a ring that was a ring apparently of copper, and that immediately suggests energy, either electrostatic energy or some sort of energy. Remember, the army was a long way from a source of power. Then you can get power from the Jeep. I used to have a Jeep, and you can get power from the attachments to the engine and so on. But in the field, they might have needed another source of power, and perhaps this was, part of a instrumentation that they needed to bring in. My colleagues around here in Silicon Valley disagree with me, which is fair. I mean, in science, you argue about something. They tend to agree with Paola that it must have been part of the craft. Now, okay, if it's part of the craft, why is it measured in millimeters? Why is it in the metric system? There is no brand on it. This one, Paola got from a shop down the road, and it has a brand on it. I mean, you know, that's what, if you're going to sell something, it has to have some identification for, if nothing else, and to pay taxes on it. And the object that Mr. Padilla recovered doesn't have any identification. It's made of a known human contemporary alloy of several metals. It's well understood. It has a classification, you know, in the classification of alloys you can buy. So it's, you know, the first reaction is it's human, but what was it doing there? Why is it in the metric system? Nobody was using the metric system at that point. And what would it have been connected to? Is it part of the controlling the propulsion or the flight of the object? We don't know, and that's what we are struggling with now.
Jacques,
We're trying to see if there was a structure inside the metal itself.
we have a surprise for you, though. We have a
Good.
surprise for you.
I'm always ready for surprises.
Tell Jacques what you're making for him, the pins you were working on. You told me you were recreating the pin that was.
Oh, the pin that I dropped, it fell on the floor of the bed of the truck. I am not quite a genius machinist, but I can machine parts. I'm cutting a pin that's gonna be exactly like the one that was there originally.
Okay, thank you.
Made out of aluminum.
Made out of
would be
aluminum, and
great.
he's gonna give it to you because he knows what fell on the ground and he wants you to see it.
It would be interesting to know how long it was also, and if there was any fillet or if it was smooth all the way. I mean, those would be useful things. And what we're hoping as we do these discussions, like the discussion this morning with the physics people, I'm hoping that somebody will come up with an idea on, you know, how we should test it and what else we should be looking for. We are looking at it with microscopes and X-rays and so on right now. The nice thing about Silicon Valley is that, you know, we can do all that with very little expense because we have friends who have access to those instruments. So we're going to try to get this so-called bracket to tell us the story.
Well, what's so great about the witness testimony, Jacques, is that he really has a passion for showing you what that pin looked like. So if he knows in his mind what it looked like, he's not lying.
No,
he knows.
We're past it.
Yeah, he knows what the pin looked like that fell on the ground, and he's still sorry he never picked it up. But they had to hurry out of there. Sure. Because the soldiers were coming back. And so he had to like rush out of there, right?
Yes.
You were afraid that they would, of course they're going to notice, but it's been 60 years that you've hidden this piece.
60 years.
Yeah, 60 years. And 60 years that they haven't talked about the story. One of the reasons is because he did take something.
Yes. I think it was wise to, not to go public with this. It would have been caught in all the excitement about Roswell and so on. And we know, all those controversies really don't bring too much to the actual knowledge. And the fact that this is still fresh and available is exceptional.
Okay, so are we in line for another questioning, Paul or Marianne? I see screen sharing here.
Okay,
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, what's going on is Marianne's trying to get a picture to show of, to answer one of the questions here. Since we've interrupted here, this may be a good time to go ahead and go into the Q&A briefly again here. And it's a perfect time for Sid to ask his question.
Thank you. I was wondering if any isotopic analysis has been done with the metal, because my imagination is that you would be able to know if the metals in there are from Earth or outside of Earth.
Well, there are two questions there in what you're asking. We have not done an isotope analysis simply because the alloy is a standard alloy, in the tables, in the metallurgical tables. We certainly could go to that, but that would not tell you if it's, the elements are the same throughout the universe. The stars have been formed in pretty much the same way. The first generation stars gave rise to the heavier elements that form the second generation stars, and here we are with the planet. And if you had iron from Mars or aluminum from Venus, and you analyze the isotopes, it would be the same thing. And we know that from the meteorites. There are meteorites flying throughout the solar system, and people pick them up. And over at Stanford, for example, one of the machines we used is used heavily by the geologists to compare Earth rocks with meteorites. There are some differences of a few percent in the ratio of one isotope to another. We should explain that, most elements, when we say iron, well, iron has a number of different versions of iron, depending on the number of the ratio of particles in the nucleus and so on. And that determines what are called isotopes. So they would have the same chemical properties, but they would have different physical properties. This all started with, of course, separating uranium for the atom bomb between uranium-235 and uranium-238, which is still the problem we have with Iraq, for example, separating uranium and so on, in centrifuges and so on. So that's all related to that. Today, you can buy specific isotopes of, as you mentioned, of very, very small quantities. For example, for medicine, hospitals will buy, certain markers that are isotopic markers that they can inject in the body to trace over a few days certain reactions in the body. But that's very, very expensive to do. You have to separate the isotopes from elements. So finding a different isotope ratio would indicate that somebody had a purpose in doing that. In other words, that this is not just ordinary aluminum or ordinary copper, that somebody wanted certain properties in that instrument. That would be very, very interesting. As you may know, Professor Sturrock at Stanford has published a number of articles about a case in Ubatuba in Brazil, where magnesium was recovered after a UFO explosion. And there is some argument about that the ratios are not the natural ratios of magnesium. I think there are 3 isotopes of magnesium, and one of them, magnesium-25, is overabundant in that particular sample. If we can, and we're looking at it now, and if we can confirm that, that would be very interesting. So here is a picture of the bracket, I think, held by Paul Hynek, actually. So it's a picture of the hands of Paul Hynek, holding this device. You can see that there are some sections that have been taken for analysis. It's not by us. We're trying not to cut any part of it, but there have been several chemical analyses of it that were done very well. So we know the composition, and of course we've measured it, and all the holes are in the metric system, which is one of the things we really don't understand what that thing was doing in a field in New Mexico in 1945. it's definitely a mystery, but it's not obviously an alien device. So we have to, again, in science, when you make a discovery or progress, usually it's starting more questions. You have one little answer and you have 12 new questions. So that's where we are. And we disagree among ourselves. I still think the best hypothesis is that it was brought into the object later. We don't know by whom. And everybody disagrees with me, so that's good.
Okay, Stephen's got a question. If you want to put your hand down and unmute.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so my question is, how did the craft get transported from the crash site onto the vehicle? Because when the military showed up, they must have had some awareness of how big this craft was to bring a vehicle that would accommodate it. So how did they move it?
So I think Mr. Padilla can describe it, because he and Remy watched every step of that process. When they brought the truck, they built a crane. So they must have known something about the weight of the object when they, to know what kind of crane to bring. Okay. So I think we should let him describe it rather than my doing it secondhand. We have the privilege of having the witness there. Paola?
Paola,
She's on
unmute yourself, Paola.
Oh, it's muted. Okay, well, Jacques is correct. We have the privilege of having the witness, which won't happen very often. So what the question was how did the military lift that thing up onto the lowboy? What did you see that they built?
They got a flatbed truck with an A-frame on it. It's called a cherry picker.
Okay, with the cherry picker, and how did they lift it? What did they have?
They hooked at the cherry picker, the cables, to each end of the oval side, and they lifted on a kitty corner so to load it up on the A-frame so that they would have enough space when they come underneath that underpass.
In other words, it was diagonal. It wasn't flat.
No, it wasn't flat. It was kind of a lopsided.
Because there is an overpass just before you come
That-
into the area, and they would have never gone under that overpass.
That overpass there, or that bridge was 14 feet. And this object, if you would stand upright, it would be over 17 feet. So they had to lay it down sideways so they can go underneath the 14 feet height of it.
And
Dave,
actually, did we do a design of that, or we were playing around with the design of that, Jacques?
No, we did not.
We didn't
No.
actually make a drawing of that. Yeah, because that is the part that Jacques really worked on, was the actual details of the removal and the weight of the object and the days that it took to do that.
Yeah, that's where we reconcile the dimensions with the weight and the way they had to move it to take it away.
So Dave Murray, do you have a question about the ETs? Or David put on the chat, he wanted to know what happened to the ETs, if you don't want to say it yourself.
No, okay. What happened to the beings? You know what happened to the ETs?
No, I don't know.
Well, we don't know that they are ETs. I mean, at this point, what kind of ET comes here and breathes our air?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, we go to Mars, we're not going to breathe the air. We go to the moon, there is no air to breathe, okay? So we have to bring our own air. So we cannot jump to the conclusion that these are ETs. They could be all kinds of things. They could be artificial beings. They could be designed by somebody else, perhaps by ETs themselves, to be workers down here on Earth, or they could be a derived branch of humanity that we've never encountered. I mean, there are still areas of the Earth that we don't know very much about. You know, some years ago, some race of shorter humanoids were discovered in, you know, in areas in the Pacific and so on that had not been explored before. We don't know everything about what's on Earth. We don't know everything about what could be inside the oceans. And we don't know if there could be a parallel universe somewhere, you know, from which I remember arguing with Dr. Hynek, you know, about this, about alternative ideas. What if they don't come from another planet? And he said, well, there could be another universe 5 minutes ahead of us with humans or humanoid forms
It's really
that are
important to,
similar to us, but are not necessarily extraterrestrial in the sense of science fiction, you know, of the last 60 years. We have to let go of those hypotheses. We have to open up, you know, from what we know today in physics. We have to look at the whole picture.
this is
And
a
I
good
agree
reminder,
with
Jacques,
Jacques.
that
I agree. I want to say that I agree with him on that hypothesis. I don't automatically think they were ETs. And I love the way he just mentioned all the different scenarios. And we need to think that way now. We need to open it up. These aren't little gray aliens that come and abduct. They're not, we don't know what they are, but they could be a whole possibility, including future travelers or whatever, another dimension. They could be anything.
they could even be androids of some sort. Jose, you said in the book that these beings, whatever they are, seem to glide, and they would, like almost like thought projection, that they would go where they wanted to go rather than walking. Is that an accurate description?
You described them as sashaying from one place to another. They weren't walking.
No, they were not walking.
How did they appear? Did they appear one place and then another place?
They were like sashaying from across the opening there. Like they were hurting.
Were they
in
like
pain?
floating, or were they like floating, or were
like
they?
like floating, sashaying.
He uses the word sashaying, which means kind of gliding.
Okay, Kai has had more than one question here. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
My question is, Jose, do you know where the beings went aside from seeing them in the binoculars? Did the military obtain these beings, or what knowledge do you have regarding that?
You know where they went.
No, I don't. They disappeared from there the second time that we were there.
So
Okay, let's,
we asked that question, of course. I mean, we'd like to know where they went. That's the right place to introduce another witness. We actually have two other people who can help essentially nail down the whole story, because we have these two primary witnesses who are there. But there was on the day of the crash, there was an aircraft, that multi-propeller plane that was coming in for a landing at Alamogordo. Remember, there was no Air Force at the time, but there was an Army Air Force, the pilots who were attached to the Army and had their own planes. This plane arrives for a landing. The controllers tell him, his name was Brody, and they tell him that could he take a look at this communication tower, as far as we can reconstruct, because they had lost communication with it. So he comes in, flies over the tower, notices that it has been damaged, describes the damage, and then looks down, sees the fire, sees the smoke, and sees two little Indian boys, okay, on their horses. So we have this correlation with, you know, an army pilot who has seen the whole thing at the time. Now, this is unique. Again, we have many stories of crashes and so on all over the world, but this one is very special because we can cross-correlate different testimony at the same time, starting with the actual moment of the crash. So he describes this, comes in for a landing. We believe from testimony that Paola recovered from the pilot's son that he may have been put in charge of cleaning up the site. So one speculation is that he may have come back with a Jeep and with a couple of people to clean up the site, which is a time when these creatures may have been taken out. Either that or they went out on their own during the night when nobody was watching. The next day is the only day where Mr. Padilla and Remy Baca are not there because they have to work for Faustino Padilla, Jose's father, in town, doing some work in the yard and working for him. So they are not going to be on the ranch. They're not going to be on the property. So there is a 24-hour or 30-hour gap in what we know about the site. We lose sight of it. Then after that, the army has taken over. We know the name of the officer who took over, who asked permission to cut the fence and to do all those things. So there may have been a handover from the Army Air Force that had the initial report from Brody and the Army detachment that was the guys who came in with the Jeeps. So there was a transmission of control of the site at that point. We don't know what happened in the first 30 hours when the creatures either were taken away or maybe were taken away by their own or just found some way of going away. So that's a reconstruction of it. And then we should talk about Sabrina because we have a fourth person who was able to bring information about what had happened during that time. So Paola, do you want to talk about Sabrina?
Yes, I want to also talk about the fact that even though they're Hispanic, they're not Indian boys. There is a Native American grandmother of Jose on the cover. We thought we'd pay tribute to her. Her name is Mama Grande. And she is, and this is Jacques' way of dealing with a lot of the history because he spoke to a Native American, Danny Many Horses, and Apache. That was Apache territory. He spoke to him for 3 hours. So there's a lot about what happened in here. So Mama Grande, and this is Jose when he was a child. Because I want to reiterate, this is a very historical book also. Now, as Jacques and I keep coming back visiting Jose, and he remembers every detail, he's got a photographic memory. He forgot to tell us that he had a niece that lived with his father, Faustino, in the late 1950s and 60s. And when he gave me her name was Sabrina Padilla, and she lived in Los Angeles. So Jacques and I looked at each other and we said, we got to grab this other witness because we had lost Remy he had died of diabetes. I have all of his testimony on camera, on a documentary I made, but this third witness, this little girl lived there. So she could go behind the house, walk over to the crash site, and in the book describes in detail the mesquite, the trees, how everything was burnt, how she was told not to go there. And then what is very interesting, especially to some of the scientists Jacques has been speaking to, is that when that craft came in and it hit the tower, it also released what Remy and Jose call angel hair or spider web. And it was all over the mesquite. In fact, you know, Jose has taken us there, shown us where it all was. So the boys are collecting this stuff that is lighting up in purple, green, and pink that looks like some kind of weird fiber optic, and putting it in a bag, in like a 10-pound bag, which they take home. And because it lights up, they're trimming their Christmas trees with it and give it to the neighbors to trim the Christmas trees. Is that true?
That's true.
That's true.
It's true.
What did it look like?
You look, Angel's hair, it's a glary material that it used to glow like a rainbow color.
Rainbow color. And did you find it everywhere, or where did you find it?
We found it right there where it blew off of that a panel of the craft.
Well, what made you pick it up?
It was something that looked pretty.
It was pretty. So they're going to decorate their trees with it.
Well,
And-
they didn't have many toys in those days, you know. So this was something to play with. That's what Sabrina told you, right?
Yeah, she said that it would bite her fingers, that what she meant bite was irritate. It would, but then, you know, Jose, being as curious as he is, you told me you tried to torch it.
I tried to torch it and it wouldn't burn.
So it wasn't fiber optic.
Because he said he tried to torch it and it wouldn't burn. And
Sabrina tried to wash it out with water, and the water will run off of it.
so when Sabrina told us this story, she verified the spider web story of Jose, that they had, you know, trimmed the Christmas trees, because she had it in plastic bags. When Jose left to go to California, they still had it. But what they had that we didn't know about, thank God we found Sabrina, was they had long strips of foil, that memory foil that when you crush it, it goes back to the original shape. And she said, we used to play with that. And there was like 4 or 5 long strips of this. Well, we didn't know that, because when the boys went, they only found 1 square of it. And so if there's long strips of it, the father must have gone back on his horse and picked up stuff that he never told his son. So the 1 square that you saw of the memory foil, what did you do with it?
That's the one that I fixed a windmill, a pump, a seal. Like a seal on the water pumps, when they leak, you have to put some kind of a seal in there. And I wrapped that foil around it and twist it, and that fill up the crack on it, on that pump, you know, and just seal it up.
Well, somebody asked Jacques and me the other day, why didn't we go and look for the windmill? What happened to the windmill?
The windmill, it's now property of Danny Armijo.
But it's not there anymore.
They brought that property there, and the windmill was torn down. The tank was built into a swimming pool.
So this is what happens when material that, if we could have retrieved that piece of memory that they used to fix the windmill. I mean, if you think clearly, back in those days, here they are decorating a Christmas tree with stuff that comes from a UFO crash, whether it be, it's not fiber optics, we don't know what it is, it's all lit up, it's rainbow colored. They're doing that. They're playing around with long strips of memory foil, which is normal. They don't know what it is. And then they fix a windmill with a strip of it. These are really important stories, because this is the way the thing went down. It was normal everyday life with an abnormal situation.
To me, the description that you just gave of the fibers glowing in those different colors reminds me. I mean, this is something I can correlate with conversation with Colonel Corso. As you know, you've written the book, you've published the book of interviews with Colonel Corso. I had a chance to spend a couple of days with him in Las Vegas when I was part of the advisory board of NIDS, of Mr. Bigelow. And we invited Colonel Corso, and I had a chance to have several private discussions with him. Well, in one of those discussions, I went into that. He had a description of material that he had been given by the Army to distribute to different laboratories for investigation and for analysis, without telling them that it came from UFOs. So the Army had a bunch of things that went into different labs, IBM, Battelle, and we know, I mean, come on, at this point, there is no big secret anymore. We know who would have had the capability to look at memory metal and so on. And nitinol is one of the names of memory metal that people use now in aerospace, which is based very much on that. The question is, nitinol hadn't been invented in 1945. In Roswell, 1947, well, you could argue that there was, advanced research on different metals that you could use for advanced aircraft. That certainly would be a possibility. We probably wouldn't know about it because it might be classified. But 1945, that's a whole other story. Again, we gained 2 years that are very critical to looking at technical history here. Now, when we look at what Colonel Corso describes, and by the way, we believe everything he said was very accurate. He had a great memory, as you know, and remembered his assignment there. He describes fibers that glowed, and he calls them fiber optic. And I had an argument with him, a very polite argument, because I had very high respect for him. But I said, look, we work with optical fibers in Silicon Valley. They don't look like that. They don't glow in the dark, okay? They transmit signals, at different frequencies from one end of the fiber to the other, and it may be 10 kilometers, okay? It's not something you have in a bundle and that glows blue and pink and green, But what you describe is what he describes. And his answer to me was, look, I'm an Army guy. I'm not a physicist. I don't design fiber optics. All I can tell you is that this is what I turned over to one of our laboratories for the Army, okay? And I have to believe him. But the testimony of Mr. Padilla here correlates with the testimony from Colonel Corso. And I think that's very important because now we're getting somewhere. We're getting to know something about the physics. Now, Sabrina also said something very interesting, that when she took that strip of metal, whatever it was, and it was very hot, and I can testify how hot it is in New Mexico in the summer. Okay, it would stay cool, it would transmit heat in a way that metal doesn't. Okay, so again, we have some interesting thermodynamic properties of these samples that I know people who would love to look further into that and to recover some of it.
So we were very lucky, Jacques, to have Sabrina, and you, who are a master craftsman, have included her in the book because that was as recent as March. And her testimony about seeing the differences in the vegetation, and her saying that the Army used to come and visit José's father through the back door. So, and people have asked me about going back to the site and the changes in the site since we've been working on this. The changes, in other words, I'm convinced, and we can disagree on this, somebody knows every time we go back there, and that it is a gold mine, because in this case, we know the location, we have the witnesses, and we have the materials. And that isn't, and the witnesses that watched it come down. And that is not the way it is in any other crash that I know of.
That's correct. And it is a gold mine of information and of inspiration for anyone trying to look at. So in a way, this case is not, doesn't take anything from Roswell. If anything, it brings more information that we can apply to Roswell. And Roswell gives us information about what the situation was in a similar crash, but not as well observed, but a similar crash 2 years later. So we can, and there are hypotheses about Roswell that we can discount based on what Mr. Padilla is telling us about 1945. So now we can begin to put patterns together. And again, my role in that, you know, I'm basically an information science guy. You know, I'm not or a nerd, if you want to call it what it really is. I've studied physics, but I'm not a professional physicist. Okay, I've studied astrophysics. I've worked in astrophysics. I know what the questions are, but what I really bring to something like this is looking at the structure of the information. So in the book, we have really looked at this case in the context of two other cases that have been studied extensively. You know, the Socorro case, which is just 8 miles straight north of there, and the case in Valençol in France, where I've been to the site several times and I've spoken to the witnesses as well, to several of the witnesses. So we now can build a pattern of information based on essentially those 3 cases, where, by the way, the shape of the object was the same and the entities associated, the creatures, were very similar. And we have a picture in the book showing those similarities. You know, this is, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but here you have the dimensions of the case in San Antonio, in New Mexico, the case in Socorro, and the case in Valençol in France. And in all 3 cases, it's not a disk, it's not a flying saucer. It's an egg-shaped object. The term of the avocado is a very good term. In Socorro, the object was also egg-shaped. It was a little bit smaller. The 2 creatures were humanoid, like the case of, seen by Mr. Padilla. They were humanoid, they were breathing air, and they were also wearing, suits. They were close to their body. And in the case of Valençol, the same thing. There were 2 creatures that were humanoid and were air breathing. So that's what I try to do, is to look for patterns, to look at things that resemble. Now, this is a different picture that shows the similarity of this object to 2 other oval shapes. Jumbo, which was a design by the Army of a container for a nuclear explosion. So Jumbo was about the same size and shape as the object that Mr. Padilla has seen, except that Jumbo weighs over 200 tons. It was, and we've seen it because it's still there, and it's not going anywhere. It's still there in the desert at ground zero, and anybody can go and look at it. It was a very large, very heavy container to test a nuclear explosion. It turned out that they never used it, which to me, in reconstructing the history, as as a physicist, is mind-blowing, that they felt sure enough of their equations that the bomb would work, that they never tested the uranium bomb. They did test the plutonium bomb, which was the blast, that took place at ground zero. So this is a picture of the inside of Jumbo, the object that crash landed with the entities that Mr. Padilla saw would have been the same dimensions. And I think that there is is that a form of communication? Is it a way of saying, we know what you're playing with, we know what you're doing, and be aware that there are other forces in nature, there are other forms of consciousness, and before you blow up another bomb, maybe you should think about what you're doing. And that's the potential message, I think, of this whole situation, this whole book. We have to think in those ways. I'm astonished that several people, Paola, you have brought people with cameras to document the testimony of Mr. Padilla. They go there for 2 days, they shoot some pictures and they go home, or they go to Roswell and they forget it because they have forgotten to notice the atom bomb. How can you miss that there was the first atom bomb was detonated, 20 miles away down the road from there 4 weeks before? How can you miss that? And if there is another force in the universe or another form of consciousness that has precipitated these events at that particular time, isn't that some kind of a message?
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because you and I have talked about that extensively. And I don't think whatever's flying around is flying around haphazardly on vacation or whatever. In that area, even in the area of New Mexico itself, Jacques, and you've done more studies of other crashes here, of other materials in this area. This is interesting to someone or something. This is a moment in time that, and what's so beautiful about it is we have the testimony of children who have an accurate memory, just like the African case, the Rwanda case. The kids were involved and the beings know that they're communicating with children. So it's the children that become the witnesses to this particular situation. And you and I've been to ground zero. I've been there twice, and the power that you feel that we went into the nuclear age. And then I'm going to add, you start the book with the diary of Laura Fermi, the wife of Enrico Fermi, who was part of the Manhattan Project, and what it did to those scientists and what Oppenheimer said after it happened. And these things are part of the book. That's why in interviews, I keep saying, for me, it's not a UFO book. For me, it's a historical book where on a timeline, something happened that was so important that it was told to children, or the children were the ones that were able to perceive it. So for you people that haven't read the book yet, this book will strike you because it happened. What happened. And we're looking at the whole framework. And that's thanks to you, because through him, when we were working on this, he would read a book about the atomic bomb or the children of the Manhattan Project or all of that. And I would read the book too, because I knew nothing about the history of the scientists. So I read the diary of Laura Fermi from cover to cover. Anybody that does any work in ufology, besides doing research, and they should do research, this took 9 years. This took 9 years, and it took 4 of Jacques. Research doesn't mean in 2 days and you figure everything out and then you make a hypothesis. You have to figure out where it happened, when it happened, and who it was told to. And in this case, I'm very passionate about this. It was to little kids.
2 little kids who could drive a truck
Well, who could
and
drive a truck
knew
and
how to use binoculars and knew the dimensions of the beams in a new house. So they were again little kids who were clever and were highly responsible. I mean, the work had to be done on the ranch, okay, and they were responsible to their father, who apparently was not a very easygoing person, and he the work really had to be done.
you did a lot of work for a 9-year-old on the ranch.
Yeah, a lot of it.
You did a lot of work. You drove a truck.
Yeah,
Paula, this is a good point to maybe allow a couple of other questions to come through.
Okay.
A couple of people have asked about, were there any colors on the faces of the beings that you saw, Jose?
Were there any colors on the faces of the beings?
come again.
Were there any colors on the faces of the beings?
No, it was just like if there was a mask.
Yeah, but what color did you see?
It was a kind of a grayish.
Grayish. The beings were grayish.
Okay, I have another question. And that is that children reportedly have better abilities to perceive thoughts before they lose them. Was there any evidence of telepathy between the children and the beings?
I think we asked that question before, and not that there was with Remy, because they flashed if you read the book, it's very detailed. They flashed a vision of people falling out of skyscrapers, and he had never seen skyscrapers, so he didn't know what he was looking at. And he saw that, and that scared him. They flashed a vision in his mind. But Jose just said he's not sure they were aware of the two little boys out there. And Jose was aware of their pain and their anguish. So that could be interpreted as communication.
Okay, Stephen's got a question. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. So it's two questions. First of all, for Mr. Vallée, is this the same crash site Diana Polsek talks about in American Cosmic she visited?
No, it is not. I've been to the crash site that she mentions. It's west of there, a couple of hours. It's near Daytil, and actually it's near the SETI array of radio telescopes. It's down the road from there, and by now several people know the location, but the location has been kept fairly quiet. I've been there twice, and that's why I became interested in taking a new look at, now that there were much more coming up about testimony in New Mexico specifically, with material that could be recovered, where people would give you access to the site. Now my interest went up.
Thank you. And my second question is for Mr. Padilla. I'm interested in when he heard about the Roswell crash, what his reaction was to that.
Okay, later on, well, first of all, he had moved to California. So when that happened, I don't think he was looking at it. But what do you think of the Roswell crash?
Well, the Roswell crash was a setup.
You think it was set up?
I bet it was a setup.
Well, see, the thing is that I will add that both Jose and Remy went to see Stanton Friedman, and he didn't talk to them because he said he would put it in this gray file. Okay, so they tried to talk in the last 10 years to some researchers. The only researcher that went to their house was Timothy Good. And I think he's one of the best in the world because he's a field researcher. And he went to visit Remy, and it's in his book, A Bob Top Secret. Timothy Good and Ryan Wood, in his book, Magic Eyes Only, has 93 crashes and mentions this particular one. So these are the only two people that took this seriously as far as researchers.
I just put this picture up of Jose when he was young. Marianne just slipped this to me. Marianne's the one that put the cover together with Paula and Jose, with Jacques in many, many, many iterations before it finally came out. So you can see how young Jose was here. Okay, Kai's got a question. Unmute yourself.
All right. The question is for Jose. I've read the UFO Aztec crash by Wendell Stevens, and it kind of intersects with kind of this story. In that scenario, the military retrieved the crash material, whatever, beings. In your case, Jose, you may have been too young for this, but do you remember the military ever, going to your father and having conversations of keeping it quiet?
Did the military tell your father to keep it quiet? Did they come and visit Faustino?
One of the military guys there was the one who told my dad for us not to go back over there. And to keep it hush-hush, because there was a military deal and they had to get their belongings out of there.
Okay, I'm going to add something to this. Sabrina said that when he moved to California, the Army would come in the back door all the time to check, because I didn't even know Faustino got on his horse, so went back and found other stuff and brought it home. He didn't either. But Sabrina was living with them, so she saw it. She saw the stuff. The other thing is that Jacques and I were talking about, because Jacques worked with Alan Hynek on Blue Book files. This was never in the Blue Book files. But what Remy told me, Kai, was that he worked for the governor of Washington, Dixie Lee, and that he got her elected. He got a Hispanic group of people to elect her. And as a thank you, she let him see this case because it's in the Atomic Energy Commission files. And Jacques, and we didn't know the Atomic Energy Commission had UFO files, so Jacques might be able to address that a little bit.
So it turns out that, one of the puzzles is if this happened this way, there should be a trace somewhere. The military is very good at keeping records, and those records are available. And in all the time I worked with Dr. Hynek, all the time I went through the Air Force files, including at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, nobody ever mentioned this case. I think that Dr. Hynek didn't know about the case, or only about vague stories or rumors about something having happened in that area. Well, it turns out that later on, somebody told the Canadian research on UFOs, the man who headed up that research, that the classification for some of these cases was higher than the atom bomb. And remember that the military detail that recovered the object that Mr. Padilla describes, they took it back to White Sands. And at that point, it would have been under the authority of the atomic branch of the government, and actually under the Manhattan Project. It turns out that there are 3 different systems of secret in the United States, which is something that I've only learned little by little. There is when people have a clearance for, a secret clearance. So you can have confidential, secret, top secret, and then above top secret, special access projects, programs, and so on. Those are the main series of secrets that go up the government ranks and, typically, through up to the White House, up to the president. The president has authority, and the different departments have authority about those types of secrets. There are 2 other types of secrets. There are the foreign espionage and counter-espionage secrets that have to do with the State Department that typically do not go directly in the same way. They go to the Secretary of the State Department that are in charge of the diplomatic files and the secret files on that side. Obviously, the president will be presented with the information if it's relevant, but it's not under the direct authority of the executive the way it works in the main body of the government. And then there is a third type of secret, which is what we believe, reconstructing what Remy said to Paola and so on, is where this object went. And those are the nuclear secrets. And then it makes sense when the Canadian government was told this is higher than the atom bomb, is that it would be in that system of classification. It has to do with something called the P clearances, the Q clearances, and the R clearances that are the nuclear clearances that go up to the Secretary of Energy. And Dixie Lee Ray would have been at one time, in charge of that line of classified information, legitimately, by the way. I mean, it's legitimate that you wouldn't put the nuclear secrets along with, the diplomatic secrets or the normal, technology secrets that go up through the Army or through the Air Force. The Air Force probably, most of the Blue Book area and so on, would not have known. I mean, you could have a top secret clearance and never be told about that particular classification on the side if you did not have a need to know about nuclear secrets. So that explains why we still don't find any trace of this these observations anywhere in what people have been digging up through different clearances and different requests to the government for coming up with the files.
This is a good point here to I'll end the Q&A for right now and move into the last section of your presentation, which you let me know when you're done with what you're going to finish here. We're going to continue until 8:30, or another half an hour, and then end abruptly, at the half hour. So Marianne just suggested I throw in a couple pictures here of the site where the craft went down. I'll go ahead and now close out the questions, and then when you two are done, you three are done, let me know, and then we'll do the remaining time with open questions.
Well, Paola.
Thank you, Jacques. I think that I'd like to ask Jose a question about the experience, because my job is just to do the questions, as you know. Jose, what do you think that meant, that crash? What is the significance of it? What do you think happened there? Why did that happen?
The crash?
Yeah, why do you think they're here? Why did you think that they did that?
I'd like to know, did they crash on purpose, or was it an accident? What does he think?
Was it an accident, or was it on purpose, and why do you think?
It had to be for a reason. I think these people were trying to find out a way how we live, and they had to make a way to crash to find out what was going on.
Okay, what he said, he thinks these people did it on purpose. They want to know how we live, and the only way they could do that is by crashing and observing. Is that
right?
And you weren't afraid at all?
No, Not at all, Honor.
Jacques, did you want to ask him anything else? I'm
What-
going to ask him about the atomic bomb because his mother was blinded in one eye and he has lost his hearing in one ear. And we have to make that clear to the people that that's why he can't hear, because there was a price to pay for ending the Second World War. There was a price to pay, and Jose, Remy, all the people here, 70,000 people paid a price.
Well, why don't you ask him that? Why don't you go into that? I'd like to know what he thinks.
What do you think was the problem with the atomic bomb? Do you think that it was, what do you think of the atomic bomb being blasted in this area? What happened?
That's a good question.
You know, I can jump into that, and Jose can tell me if I'm right. But in my awareness of course, I've read books about the atomic bomb and so on. I've read books about Enrico Fermi and about Oppenheimer. All the books talk about the scientists and what they did and what they went through with the army, the interaction between the army and the scientists, so on, the secrecy, the classification, the whole thing. So I had read that. What in researching this further, a number of very, very good books have come out in the last 2 years. One of them by a historian who had done long years of research on the Japanese side of this. How did World War II end? And I found that what I thought I knew and what was in the books I had read wasn't wrong, but it was really incomplete. First of it, what happened, everybody talks about the test. They did a test of the bomb before they could drop it on Japan. Well, in a test in physics, it means you go to the lab and you mix some chemicals and then you drop something in it and you observe the reaction. And if it turns green, then you write a paper about it, and then it becomes an industrial process, and then somebody buys a patent for it, and then you go on and build something. That's not what happened. I mean, the bomb, that this so-called test, was equivalent in power to the bomb at Hiroshima and the bomb at Nagasaki. It was a full-scale nuclear detonation in an area where there were people, where there were Americans. In the whole area that would be affected by the bomb, there were 70,000 people, including, Mr. Padilla and his family and the other families that were all around that area. They were never told about it. And, history has its own judgment. In retrospect, we could say they should have evacuated the people. If they had done that, they would have, broken the classification, the secrecy. They would have taken a risk of not being able to end the war. They had to end the war in Japan. And those books that I've read have changed my whole perception of that, that part of our history, of how history changed in those few weeks. What was happening at the time in Japan was that Japan knew that it was going to be invaded from the north by the Russians. The Russians had won the war essentially in Germany between the American advance through France, from Normandy and France into into Germany, and the Russians taking over Berlin. And at that point, they were done. And the next problem was Japan. So Stalin was rearming, the Red Army with our tanks and with our money, because at that point we were fully cooperating with Stalin to reinforce the Russians, so that we didn't have to do we being, America, didn't have to do all the work in Europe. And so Stalin had rearmed, had 1 million men moving from what was going to become the satellites, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Germany, East Germany, and so on. They were moving to Manchuria to push back the Japanese into China, through China, and then invade Japan. I mean, that was clearly the path that is described in those books. At the same time, the US had essentially eliminated the Japanese Air Force, had control of the air over Japan, and was bombing Tokyo, was bombing Japan, and could invade from the sea. So that was the state of the world at that point. The estimate by the US military was that there would be 1 million dead in a few weeks during that conflict. The Japanese were ready to die for the motherland. At this point, they knew they would be pushed back from Manchuria. They would be pushed back from China. The fight would be on the shores of Japan. Okay, and they would face the Red Army, and they would face essentially US Air Force and the US Navy. I didn't know that. I thought that, I knew the history. I was born in 1939 when World War II started in between Germany and France. I remember the invasion of France. I remember, what happened at the end of the war. I saw the end of the war in Europe. I wasn't, and even in school, I wasn't told very much about what happened in the Pacific. So I relearned that because of, this testimony, because I wanted to do a good job in the book of putting the picture around it. It wasn't just a bunch of scientists. There were people there. When the army went to talk to Faustino, to Mr. Padilla's father, they spoke in Spanish. Of course, they spoke in Spanish. I mean, the officers there were Hispanic. They could speak English and they could speak Spanish. No, but this was, most of the people there were Hispanic or were Indian, were Native Americans, which is why we wanted to have, Mama Grande on the cover to remind people. That's why I started and ended the book not with the testimony from, great scientists, Enrico Fermi, Oppenheimer, and the people that, I respect, that I learned from in the university, but I wanted Laura Fermi, Enrico Fermi's wife, her diary, her book about the war is the true. I mean, when you were in the middle of that whole operation and you didn't know the secrets. I mean, Enrico wasn't telling her, how the atom bomb worked and what they were going to do. The secret was kept, but she can testify to what they went through, the trauma, the families, what the tiredness, the things that they went through emotionally, intellectually through that. She was a witness to all of that. And of course, at the end of the war, what they felt about what they had done, and the difference is how the scientists reacted to having introduced this horrible weapons. Remember, General Eisenhower was against using the atom bomb in Japan. Eisenhower, okay? And several of the generals, several of the general staff were against using it. And they argued with the president, against using the bomb. The bomb saved 1 million lives. And there was, people will argue forever about what are the ethical decisions here. And the decisions had to be made by Truman, about whether to use a bomb or not. When Roosevelt died, Truman was vice president. Mr. Truman had not been briefed about Project Manhattan. He didn't know about Project Manhattan. The vice president of the United States didn't know. They sent somebody to get him from his home, to bring him back to the White House. They told him, the president has died. You're the next president. We need to brief you about something where you'll have to make important decisions in the next few days. And they took him aside and they briefed him on Project Manhattan. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, in reading those books, I was crying reading those books. The historian who went to Japan to decipher, to get the translations of the historical records of Japan, brings out an extraordinary report on the end of the war. The atom bomb didn't end the war. The Japanese general didn't care that Hiroshima had been leveled. They didn't care that Nagasaki had been leveled. They understood that this was a war and everybody had to be prepared to die. And that at this point, the question was, what is the destiny of the motherland? What is the destiny of Japan when you're a warrior? There is an extraordinary meeting in the bunker under the Imperial Palace where the generals are there. It's very hot. Remember, it's August. I've been in Tokyo in August. I can tell you it's very hot, very sweaty. There is no air conditioning. They are there in their full uniforms. They are waiting for the emperor. The emperor comes. He's a modest, ordinary man, a very intelligent man. He understands his responsibility to his people. The generals say Nagasaki has been destroyed. They have more atom bombs that they can drop on us. We don't care. We're going to continue the war. We're going to mass the army in the north of Japan. We're going to wait for the Russians. And we're going to, if we all have to die, we all have to die. This was their framework. It was, the framework of martial arts. It was the framework of a warrior who is ready to die. They didn't really care how many people died. The emperor says, we can't do that. I will not let you do that. I'm responsible for my people, and we're going to surrender to the Americans. A couple of them leave the meeting, go to their office, close the door, and commit harakiri because they cannot live through that. They cannot argue against the emperor. The emperor is a god to them. This is why they've gone through the war. Okay, again, we think we're Americans. We think we're so powerful, and we've taught them something with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't care. At that level, of course, they knew about it. It was important. They knew there were more atomic bombs that were going to be dropped on Japan. That was not their priority. The emperor turns out to be a normal man, an intelligent man, a caring man. He knows that this is over, that if Japan is to survive, they need to surrender. This is extraordinary. Nobody ever taught me that. You don't teach that in schools in America. It's taught that we won the war. Well, we won the war with a lot of help from Stalin, a lot of help from people who were, in the resistance and in other places all over the world. And Japan stopped the war because the emperor used his moral power. He didn't have any power of his own. His power was that he was the son of heaven, and the son of heaven was there in this sweaty, little room under the palace. And he was saying, gentlemen, this is the end. I'm not going to sacrifice my people. Now, that is what I've learned, thanks to Mr. Padilla, thanks to you, Paola, about what really happened. And it's overwhelming. Oppenheimer was a great man. He was a great scientist. Enrico Fermi was a great scientist. They did great things, but they were there for 4 years. And then they went to the University of Chicago or Princeton and other places, and they taught physics, and they created what we have now as nuclear energy and nuclear physics that we teach in universities. But there were people there. And in Japan, there were people who were under those bombs. And that's what happens at 20 miles from ground zero. This egg falls from the sky with 3 little creatures inside, in front of 2 kids. Isn't there a message there? Again, we need to look at the big picture. We need to widen the scope and then narrow it down again to what Mr. Padilla is telling us. And that's a trip I've gone through thanks to you, thanks to him. And, it's changed my life. I mean, it's not just a book. It's something that I've understood because of you that I would never have understood otherwise.
Well, I feel the very same way, Jacques, as you know, because it's been a 4-year journey. This is not just a book.
No.
I feel the very same way. I think that the collaboration with this is probably the most important thing that I've ever done in my entire career. But I want to assure the people that are listening that we've also formed a relationship with José. That José, I will never leave you, and I always come here. Yeah, and he's waiting for you, Jacques.
I'll be there.
Pins, he's got to give you the pins that he made. He's waiting for you to come back.
No, we still have work to do. My job is to get other scientists involved to tell the story so that people understand that this is part of American history. This is part of world history. And that object was, as somebody has said, was a donation. It was something, pay attention and I think that to some extent, the fact that it's classified so long is legitimate. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm a disciplined scientist here. I know what I know how to do. I know that we need to bring in other people from different areas who have an open mind and can jump in. And I think that whatever is classified is probably classified legitimately. That doesn't stop us. Some people have told me, well, you don't have the classification that would give you access to any of that. I don't care. I mean, we have José Padilla, right? He was there. The people who do classification, they were not there. How do they know what happened? We have the ability to ask José those questions to get direct answer. We can go to the site. We can understand what the site itself is telling us. This is no ordinary place. That place is also a historic place. It was a ritual gathering place for the Native Americans. This is where they had gatherings, they had ceremonies. This is where they could, bring their horses to water. And that site has a history of its own. It wasn't just some ordinary piece of land. And again, we need to keep all of that in mind when we're trying to understand this very simple story of 2 kids finding a crashed UFO.
Okay, Paul, are you still there?
I am, and you know what I'm concluding right now? We're very close to the end of our time anyway. This has been a passionate and heartfelt statement that just to me, just concludes our
Yes,
presentation. I think that we ought to just close with this and recognize that this has been just an incredible exchange. Tonight, we've heard multiple examples of evidential corroboration that reinforces the credibility of this entire account. We know we had a dynamic exchange here when we have the presenters asking questions of each other. You know, they wrote the book and here they're asking questions of each other.
And we still disagree about this bracket, okay?
okay, you know,
I felt,
But that's what you do in science, you know. If it's not just reading a book and, you know, taking the test. I mean, science is a clash of ideas, of hypotheses, and that's good research. You know, that's why I got into science, to do this kind of thing.
I
yeah,
found you-
and Paul, you're absolutely right. No, this was an experiment with the three of us. I'm glad you guys went along with it. I think it would have been this is much better than Paola Harris doing a slide presentation, which would have been totally boring. But at least for me personally, people can see the kind of work I do. Because I mean, Jacques just found out, I mean, a lot of people say, who's Paola Harris? You know, how did you write a book with her? Where did she come from? And at least people can see that my work also involves the personal. You know, I'm here with Jose. I came purposely. Jacques and I will come back just like we did with other people that I've worked with. This has been a gift. This has been a gift. And Jose, I think we should thank everybody that was part of it. There's a whole list of you people that helped us. We should thank everybody that helped us with the book.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Everybody that was involved from day one, that listened to the story, that did the transcripts, that came down with me to help film, that supported us. So thank you to everybody out there for helping Jacques and me produce this piece of history.
I found two quotes from your book that are worth repeating. The first is, what kind of aliens would come from the other end of the galaxy only to bump into a radio tower and crash in the shrubbery? And the other quote is, evidence of official lying about UFOs is not evidence of the reality of UFOs. Now that closely mirrors Carl Sagan's famous quote, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So I will close by saying that you can obtain this and other books from our distinguished authors on Amazon.com. Let's see if I can get to, well, there's the link there at the bottom of I'm trying to
our
figure-
website, Trinity Secret. That's our website.
Yeah, okay. So that's that. And also you can see Regina Meredith's interview, her interview of Jacques and Paola just last week on Gaia TV, which will be broadcast in August. So on behalf of the BOULDEXO Board of Directors, I just heartily thank our presenters for such heartfelt information and wonderful dialogue, and also thank our audience for their participation. So from Socorro, from San Francisco, and Longmont, Colorado, we all say thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.